We want to thank you all again for coming tonight. It's been great staying to meet you all. And we hope you enjoy the cocktail hour. Again, the bar will be open until 8:45. Yeah, okay. I'm Achievement Guy Krishnan, and this is Noah Storts, and we've been the co-presidents for GlowMed this past year. And I'd like to say that I'm Noah's better half, but both of us can do better.
Thanks. So, GlowMed at UC is a chapter of the National GlowMed Organization, which was founded in 2007 by students at Northwestern University working with an organization in Ghana. These students were frustrated with the ways that college students were approaching global health work, primarily through donating money to humanitarian organizations, participating in short-term medical mission trips, and volunteering abroad. While visiting their partner organization, the students saw that none of the medical supplies that they had sent were being used. Instead, they were just being stored in a warehouse. They decided to sit down with the people at the organization to find out why this was the case.
So they were told that the items that they were sent simply weren't needed. One Northwestern student, Victor Roy, asked why the organization wasn't using the materials and didn't want them. And the answer he got was, Victor, we are African. We listen to our donors. The group of students went home determined to design a new solution, one that would combine their passion, creativity, and resources as students to really empower grassroots leaders around the world. Out of this conversation, GlowMed, as we know, was born. GlowMed has since expanded its presence to 36 universities, partnering with organizations in over 20 countries. Our grassroots partner for GlowMed at UC is Social Action for Children and Women. We call them SOP. And if you look over around the posters that have a lot of information about SOP, we also have pamphlets, so feel free to grab one and learn a little bit more about our program.
So, GlowMed at UC at its core is built on the idea of partnership. The GlowMed model is designed as a bridge, one that connects energetic, passionate students, like the ones in this room, with change makers around the world. Grassroots organizations like SAW are successful in improving their communities because they know firsthand what's actually needed. Our partner contact, Aung Tun Lin, has written about SAW's importance for this benefit dinner. He states, SAW provides counseling and training to women and children who have been displaced along the Thai-Burma border and assists Burmese women and children affected by displacement by providing support services in areas of health, education, and safe housing. ATL, as we call him, would also like you to know that even though SAW has prepared him to apply for jobs around the world, that he wishes to return and contribute to the SAW organization. Through Zoom calls, fundraising, and constant communication, we have had this incredible opportunity to work with ATL and SAW as they make community projects happen. Along the way, we continue to see how solidarity, inclusivity, and advocacy are crucial areas we must continue to grow with each year.
Tonight, our distinguished speakers will present their perspectives on ethics and research in global health, as well as community trauma and resilience. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Jason Blackard, and Jason directs a research lab here at UC, UC's College of Medicine, focusing specifically on all sorts of viruses. I could tell you, there's too many. He also serves as the Associate Director of the KL2 Scholars Program, and has previously served as the Director of Medical Student Research Initiatives in the UC College of Medicine's Office of Global Health. He's directed courses on global health that include study tours to South Africa, Botswana, Ghana, and China. He's really Mr. Worldwide. So without further ado, let's hear from Jason.
Okay, let's see if I need a microphone. I usually just yell really loudly. So thank you for the nice introduction. I think I'm actually going to start by, there's a whole bunch of people in this audience that I haven't seen in a little while, so I want to, a whole table of faculty and friends over here in this direction. So Kate, Robin, other, Kyle, say hi. I see my neighbor. Hey, Shivani. She literally does, actually, she is my neighbor. She literally lives next door. GlowMed graduates. I see a whole table. Hey, okay. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to say, the first thing when Ajit and Noah were talking, the history of GlowMed is really interesting. That story in Ghana actually really resonates with me because about 3 years after the national chapter was started, I took a group of high school students to Ghana for a month in 2010. And one of the things that we did was exactly what you just heard, that story of. We brought a whole bunch of donations. We packed 4 or 5 bags. We took used clothes, we took books, some people brought computer parts. And they sat there in an orphanage until somebody said, yeah, thanks, but there's not a lot of stuff here that we can use. because it was either something that was going to require batteries, or it might need to be fixed first, or it was just not really, something appropriate for their setting. So I think that that's something that I always try to think about when I'm engaging my students and others, is how we really paid attention to what our local partners are really after. Have we really asked them what they want from us and tried to explain to them what we are trying to do? So with that segue, I wanted to, or that introduction, I want to thank again everybody for inviting me. I'm going to take a little bit of a journey back to the past for us. This is actually Robert Seltzer's fault, so I'm not looking for her. She invited me to her Global Health and Social Justice course recently, and one of the things that she had charged me with doing was talking about ethics in research and in medicine. Now, I am not an ethicist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a virologist. So I study all those things that your mother told you not to get when you were younger. All those nasty little bugs that we're hearing about, including the current pandemic. And when I was asked to talk on that topic, I really had to think a little bit about what I wanted to say about that. What does ethics in research or medicine mean to me? And again, I'm not an ethicist, so I come at this from a slightly different perspective. And what I realized is that I could not talk about COVID-related ethical challenges without going back in the past a little bit. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the things that we hear about today, are we wearing masks? Are we vaccinated? Individual rights versus the public health rights. The politicization of science in general and how we present media, misinformation, all these things that we're constantly talking about in the global health arena and here in the US as well, and including in our current environment, have a history that many of us don't know about. And some of the examples are fairly well known and some of them aren't. So I'm going to show you a 10-minute video and then I'm going to stop. That's all I'm going to do today. But I do want to ask, how many people in the room have heard of the Tuskegee syphilis experiments? Good. Normally, I would have 3 or 4 people in the room that have heard of this. And as we watch this video, I just want you to think of how this historic event that started in the late 1920s and ended in 1972, so before many of us in the room were even born. Not me, that was when I was born, unfortunately. I just told you how old I am. But it ended in 1972, has a massive impact on how certain portions of our population think about the medical establishment, and had a major impact on trust and the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're all paying quite a bit of attention to these days, but probably should have been paying a lot more attention to in the past as well. So a 10-minute video, and then I'll come up here and ask you a couple of quick questions. We'll do Jeopardy style questions about Tuskegee, and then you'll get to eat.
In 1932, the medical community still did not know a whole lot about treating syphilis. This was the case despite documentation of the disease dating all the way back to around when Columbus made his famous jaunt across the globe. According to the Oxford Journal, syphilis was a cultural embarrassment and had many different names that exemplified prejudices of different nationalities. The German and English called it the French pox. The Russians referred to it as the Polish sickness and the Poles as the German sickness. The Japanese called it the Chinese ulcer. In the 16th century, Europe experienced a syphilis epidemic, which was likely caused by the abundance of sailors traveling from seaport to seaport and doing what sailors do when they come into port. In fact, there is some evidence that points to Columbus and his crew being the ones who brought syphilis back from the New World. Anyway, despite the disease being around for 4 or 5 centuries, there was not one true successful treatment for it. One popular remedy for several centuries was the use of mercury, which is actually quite poisonous in its own right. People would either ingest this or rub it on the skin. This led to the popular saying that a night in the arms of Venus leads to a lifetime on Mercury. In 1908, Japanese scientist Sahachiro Hata, working in Germany, discovered the drug Salvarsan was somewhat effective as a treatment for syphilis. It was also quite toxic as it came came from the arsenic family. There were instances of patients losing all limbs after taking this drug. Eventually, in 1912, Hatta and Nobel Prize winner Paul Ehrlich developed an easier-to-administer but still toxic drug called Neosalvarsan, which became the standard treatment for syphilis until the late 1940s. In the early 20th century, the United States Public Health Service, PHS, was in charge of monitoring, identifying, and figuring out ways to treat ailments, diseases, and conditions that were impacting all US citizens. They were divided into divisions, with one division completely focused on venereal diseases. In 1957, this particular division would be transferred over to the Center for Disease Control, CDC, but in 1932, the PHS covered sexually transmitted diseases. Between 1929 and 1931, the Rosenwald Fund, an organization that promoted the education and healthcare of poor African-American farmers, sponsored a study with the PHS to identify the southern counties with the highest rates of syphilis among African-American males. Their original intention was to identify and treat the disease. Macomb County, Alabama, had the highest rate, with over 35% of the male population infected with the disease. By 1931, the Great Depression was at its height and the Rosenwald funds were short. Despite the need to continue research, the Rosenwald Fund stopped operating in this capacity. So the PHS approached the Tuskegee Institute about forming a research group in order to study the effects of untreated syphilis on a black male population for a duration of 6 to 9 months, and then follow up with a treatment plan. The Institute agreed, along with the head of the university's hospital, Dr. Eugene Dibble. The study during the first year was led by Dr. Taliaferro Clark. PHS enrolled 600 Macon County men, 399 with syphilis and 201 who weren't infected. They would be a part of the study. None of the men actually knew what the study was for. They were lured in with the promise of free healthcare, something that none of them had, and also the treatment of bad blood, a general localized term that encompassed several different afflictions, including anemia, fatigue, and other venereal diseases. The men were told that they were going to get free medical exams, meals, and burial insurance. For those who actually had syphilis, they were never informed of their diagnosis nor given any treatment for it. Additionally, very painful and unnecessary spinal taps were performed on many people in the study. It was said that the reason for the deception was that it would be the only way the men would stay in the study, and the researchers, they wanted to closely observe the course of the disease over a large sample size to see the effects as the disease progressed, even to death. But not to worry, because as long as the ones that died allowed autopsies to be performed, their funeral expenses would be covered. It was actually not an uncommon practice at the time of taking the government's consent in medical matters rather than the individuals, but in part the deception seemed to result from the lack of respect that the doctors had for the men's intellectual capabilities. Most were illiterate, which the researchers thought was helpful, as it would be part of the subjects to figure out what was going on. There were also less than subtle hints of racial prejudice. For example, in a letter to a colleague, Dr. Clark wrote that these Negroes are very ignorant and easily influenced by things that would be of minor significance in a more intelligent group. Dr. Raymond Vondeler was the on-site doctor of the study. He actually supported partial treatment for the men for the sole purpose of making sure they remained in the study years in and stayed alive. He was the one who actually gained consent for the men for spinal taps via letters that he sent to them. They read, "You will now be given a last chance for second examination. This examination is a very special one, and after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in condition to stand it." The study was initially only planned to go on for 9 months, but it went on for well beyond a year, and then, due to breakthroughs, was extended beyond that. In 1934, 2 years after the study began, the first major paper was published detailing the health effects of untreated syphilis. By 1936, according to the CDC, a medical paper was published criticizing the treatment plan for the men. 1940 brought efforts to hinder the men in the study from getting treatment ordered under the military draft effort. You see, about 250 of them had registered for the draft and then found to have syphilis and ordered to be treated. In 1928, Nobel laureate Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. 1930 was the first recorded medical use of penicillin to treat infections. After penicillin was used to treat the survivors of the Boston Cocoa Grove fire in 1942, it became the medicine of choice for the United States military for infections. By 1945, penicillin was the accepted treatment. Syphilis. Despite this, the subjects of the Tuskegee syphilis experiments were never administered or offered penicillin as a treatment. The study administrators wanted to watch the progression of the disease as the men got sick and, in many cases, died for the 40 years that the study went on, even though for much of it a relatively effective treatment was available. All total, it's estimated that 128 of the men died either directly from syphilis or to it. 40 also infected their wives, and in some cases possibly others, and there were 19 of the men's children who were born with congenital syphilis. Finally, on July 25th, 1972, Jean Heller of the Associated Press broke the story that uncovered the truth about the study. The government panel ruled that the study was ethically unjustified and ended it. In the summer of 1973, attorney Fred Gray filed a class action suit on behalf of the men against the PHS, and it ended with $9 million, which is about $50 million today, being handed out to participants as settlement. And that was some bonus facts. In a similar study, this time to test penicillin's effectiveness in treating syphilis and other STDs, researchers led by Dr. John Charles Cutler, who was also involved in the Tuskegee experiments from the United States, funded by the Public Health Services and Pan American Health Sanitary Bureau and the National Institutes of Health, headed to Guatemala in 1946